For 49 days straight, the same cop pulled over the same black man. On the 50th day, that cop was bleeding out on an operating table, staring up at the only surgeon who could save his life. But before we get to that moment, you need to understand how it all started. You need to feel what Dr. Marcus Washington felt every single morning for 7 weeks. Because this story isn't just about one man's hatred or another man's grace. It's about the weight that black folks in America carry every single day. The weight of being seen as a threat when you're actually a healer. Dr. Marcus Washington was 52 years old. He was a cardiothoracic surgeon at Methodist University Hospital in Memphis, Tennessee, one of only 3 black heart surgeons in the entire state. Let that sink in for a moment. In a state with nearly 7 million people, only 3 black doctors were trusted to cut open a human chest and repair the most vital organ in the body. Marcus was one of them. Over his career, Marcus had performed more than 4,000 open-heart surgeries. He had saved the lives of senators who made laws that affected millions. He had operated on CEOs who controlled companies worth billions. Just a month before the story begins, he had saved an 8-year-old boy named Terrell whose heart had been damaged by a rare infection. Terrell's mother had grabbed Marcus's hands afterward and wept, calling him an angel sent from God. But none of that mattered on a Tuesday morning at 6:47 a.m. when those blue lights started flashing in Marcus's rearview mirror. The sky was just beginning to change from that deep purple of early morning to the soft orange glow of sunrise. Marcus had his gospel playlist going through the car speakers. Fred Hammond's No Weapon filling the interior of his Mercedes E-Class. In the cup holder sat a thermos of black coffee that his wife Denise had prepared for him before he left, the same way she had every morning for 28 years of marriage. He was driving down Popper Avenue, right near the entrance to Overton Park, heading to the hospital for an 8 a.m. surgery, a triple bypass on a 67-year-old grandmother named Dorothy Mae Jenkins. She had shown Marcus pictures of her 11 grandchildren during the pre-op consultation, made him promise he would have her dancing at her granddaughter's wedding in June. Marcus was thinking about Dorothy Mae when he saw the patrol car behind him. When those lights started flashing, his stomach dropped, not because he had done anything wrong, but because he knew, the way every black man in America knows, that doing nothing wrong doesn't always matter. Marcus pulled his Mercedes to the side of the road. He did what his father had taught him decades ago. What every black father teaches his son, whether the son wants to learn it or not. He turned off the engine. He placed both hands at 10 and 2 on the steering wheel. He stayed completely still. He waited. The officer took his time getting out of the patrol car. Marcus watched in his side mirror as the man approached. Watched the way his hand rested on his holster, like he was expecting trouble. The officer was white, maybe mid-40s, with a buzz cut that was starting to go gray at the temples. When he got close enough, Marcus could read his nameplate. Hendricks, license and registration. No good morning. No explanation for why Marcus had been stopped. Just a command, delivered in a tone that made clear who had the power in this situation. Marcus nodded slowly. He had learned a long time ago that sudden movements could get a black man killed. Officer, I'm going to reach into my jacket pocket for my wallet. Is that okay? Officer Dale Hendricks didn't respond. He just stared through the window with pale blue eyes that held something Marcus couldn't quite identify. Something that went beyond the usual suspicion he had encountered from police over the years. Marcus retrieved his wallet slowly, like he was handling something that might explode. He pulled out his license and registration and handed them over carefully. He asked a question he knew wouldn't get a real answer. May I ask why I was pulled over, officer? Hendricks studied the license for a long moment. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly when he read the name and address. When he saw the East Memphis zip code that told him this black man lived in one of the nicest neighborhoods in the city. Your left brake light is out, Hendricks said finally. Marcus knew that wasn't true. He had just had his car serviced a week before at the Mercedes dealership. They had done a full inspection. Everything was working perfectly. I just had my car serviced last week at. Are you arguing with me, sir? The way Hendricks said sir made it sound like a curse word. Made it sound like a threat. Marcus took a breath. He thought about Dorothy Mae Jenkins waiting at the hospital, thought about her 11 grandchildren, thought about the surgery scheduled for 8 a.m., and how he needed to be there to prep. "No, officer," Marcus said quietly. "I'm not arguing." Hendricks wrote him a fix-it ticket. He didn't say another word, just tore the ticket from his pad, shoved it through the window, and walked back to his patrol car without looking back. Marcus sat there for a moment after Hendricks drove away. His hands were still at 10 and 2 on the steering wheel. His heart was beating faster than it should. The gospel music was still playing, but he couldn't hear any more. All he could hear was the echo of that word, sir, and all the contempt packed into those 3 letters. He arrived at the hospital 20 minutes late, had to rush through his prep, made it to the operating room just in time. Dorothy Mae Jenkins' surgery went perfectly. 5 hours of precise, delicate work, and her heart was stronger than it had been in 20 years. But before Marcus went home that night, he stopped in the parking garage, got out of his car, and walked around to the back. He checked his brake lights. Both of them worked perfectly. Now, if this had happened once, Marcus would have chalked it up to bad luck. Maybe a cop having a bad day who decided to take it out on the first black man he saw driving an expensive car through a nice neighborhood. It happened. It wasn't right, but it happened. But it didn't happen just once. The next morning, Marcus was driving down the same stretch of Popper Avenue. Same time, right around 6:45 a.m. He had switched to a different gospel song, trying to shake off the memory of the day before. The blue lights appeared in his mirror again. Same patrol car. Same officer. Same cold blue eyes. "Step out of the vehicle, sir." This time, the excuse was different. Hendricks claimed there had been a suspicious report of a vehicle matching Marcus's description involved in a robbery 2 nights prior. Marcus stood on the side of the road in his surgical scrubs while Hendricks searched his car for 35 minutes. Commuters drove past, slowing down to look. Marcus could feel their eyes on him. Could imagine what they were thinking. What assumptions they were making about the black man being searched by police at 6:45 in the morning. Hendricks found nothing, of course. There was nothing to find. Marcus's car contained a medical bag, some case files, and a Bible his mother had given him when he graduated from medical school. "You're free to go," Hendricks said when he was done. He tossed Marcus's medical bag onto the pavement. Didn't apologize. Didn't explain. By the 3rd day, Marcus started taking a different route to work. He left earlier, drove through different neighborhoods, took back roads he hadn't used in years. But somehow, and this is where the story takes a turn that still doesn't make sense, Officer Dale Hendricks found him anyway. This time on Union Avenue, near the FedEx Forum. On the 4th day, Hendricks appeared on Madison Avenue. On the 5th day, it was near St. Jude Children's Research Hospital. It was like the man had a sixth sense. Like he knew exactly where Marcus would be and when. Like he had made it his personal mission to intercept Marcus every single morning before he could get to work. The harassment continued for 49 days. 49 days. 32 traffic stops. 11 tickets. Every single one of which was later dismissed in court because none of them were based on actual violations. 2 full vehicle searches that turned up nothing but embarrassment for Marcus and satisfaction for Hendricks. One morning, this one still makes Marcus's hands shake when he talks about it, Hendricks made him lie face down on the pavement, in full view of morning commuters, because Marcus matched the description of an armed robbery suspect they were looking for. Marcus was wearing his white coat that morning, the one with his name embroidered on it in blue thread. Marcus Washington, M.D., cardiothoracic surgery. His hospital ID badge was clipped to his pocket, clearly visible. The robbery suspect they were looking for was described as 5 feet 6 inches tall and 160 pounds. Marcus was 6'3" and 215 pounds. It didn't matter. Nothing mattered. Not his credentials, not his reputation, not his service to the community. To Dale Hendricks, he was just another black man who needed to be reminded of his place. The physical toll on Marcus was becoming impossible to hide. He started having trouble sleeping, would lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, dreading the sunrise because he knew what was waiting for him on the road to work. His blood pressure, which had always been textbook perfect, started creeping up. His doctor wanted to put him on medication. And his hands. Lord, his hands. Those steady surgeon's hands that had never once trembled during 4,000 operations started shaking when he held his morning coffee. The tremor was subtle at first, just a slight vibration that he could hide by gripping the cup tighter. But it was getting worse. For a cardiothoracic surgeon, unsteady hands aren't just a problem. They're a death sentence for your career. One slip during a bypass surgery, 1 millimeter of error while repairing a valve, and your patient dies on the table. Marcus's wife, Denise, saw what was happening to him. She begged him to file a complaint with the Memphis Police Department's Internal Affairs Division. She had saved every ticket, documented every stop, written down the dates and times and excuses Hendricks had given. "Baby, you have to fight this," she said one night, holding his shaking hands in hers. "This man is destroying you." Their oldest son, Marcus Jr., who worked as a civil rights attorney in Atlanta, called and said he would fly home that weekend, said he could help build a case, said they could sue the department, go to the media, make this into a national story about police harassment. But Marcus hesitated. And here's why. And I need y'all to really understand this part, because it speaks to something deep in the Black American experience. Marcus Washington had grown up in Whitehaven, on the south side of Memphis. His father, James Washington Sr., had been a janitor at a white school for 31 years. His mother, Earline, had cleaned houses in Germantown and Collierville, wealthy white neighborhoods where she was expected to use the back door and never forget her place. They had raised Marcus to keep his head down, work twice as hard as everyone else. Don't give them any excuse to hold you back. Don't make waves. That advice had gotten Marcus into Morehouse College on a full scholarship. It had gotten him into Meharry Medical College, when other schools wouldn't even look at his application. It had earned him a surgical residency at Johns Hopkins, where he was the only black resident in his year. It had given him a beautiful home in East Memphis, a marriage of 28 years to a woman he still loved more than anything, 3 successful children, and a legacy most people could only dream of. So when Denise asked him why he wouldn't fight back, Marcus gave her the same answer his father had given him when Marcus was 12 years old and had come home crying, because a store owner had followed him around accusing him of shoplifting. "Baby, I didn't get this far by letting them see me sweat. I'm not going to give this man the satisfaction." But here's what Marcus didn't tell his wife, what he didn't tell his son, what he didn't tell anyone. Something about Officer Dale Hendricks felt personal. It wasn't just the harassment. Plenty of black men face harassment from police. It was tragic and wrong, but it wasn't unusual. What made this different was the way Hendricks looked at Marcus. The way those pale blue eyes seemed to burn with something more than casual racism, more than the typical power trip of a cop who enjoyed pushing people around. There was hatred in those eyes. Pure, focused, personal hatred. And Marcus had no idea why. He had never met Dale Hendricks before that first morning on Popper Avenue, had never seen him at the hospital, never crossed paths with him at any community event, never had any interaction with him whatsoever. So why did this man hate him so much? Why had he made it his personal mission to destroy Marcus's peace of mind? The answer to that question was coming. And when it arrived, it would change everything Marcus thought he knew about his family, his father, and the secrets that had been buried for 40 years. But first, there would be a photograph, a faded picture from the early 1980s that would unlock a past Marcus never knew existed. And eventually, there would be an operating table, a gunshot wound, and a choice that would test everything Marcus believed about justice, mercy, and what it truly means to be a healer. That's all coming. Stay with me. The harassment continued. Day after day, week after week, Marcus kept his head down, kept his hands steady through surgery after surgery, kept saving lives while his own life was being slowly dismantled by a man with a badge and a grudge he couldn't explain. But the strain was becoming visible to everyone who knew him. Dr. Patricia Coleman had been chief of surgery at Methodist University Hospital for 8 years. She had known Marcus for 23 years, had watched him grow from a talented young resident into one of the finest surgeons she had ever worked with. They had saved lives together, lost patients together, celebrated victories, and mourned failures side by side. She knew when something was wrong, One afternoon, about 6 weeks into the harassment, Patricia caught Marcus in the hallway outside the surgical suite. He had just finished a 7-hour operation, a mitral valve replacement that had been complicated by unexpected scar tissue from a previous procedure. He looked exhausted, drained, running on nothing but vending machine coffee and stubborn determination. "Marcus, I need to talk to you," Patricia said, pulling him into an empty consultation room. Marcus tried to put on a smile. The Marcus Washington smile that had reassured thousands of patients and their families over the years. The one that said everything was fine, everything was under control, there was nothing to worry about. But Patricia saw through it. "I've known you for 23 years, she said. "Something is breaking you down, and it's not the work. You've never let the work break you. Talk to me." What could Marcus say? That he was being hunted by a white police officer who seemed to have made destroying his peace of mind his personal mission? That despite all his accomplishments, all his degrees, all the lives he had saved, he felt like a scared teenager again every morning when he got behind the wheel of his car? So he said nothing, just told Patricia he was fine, just needed some rest. Nothing to worry about. She didn't believe him. He could see it in her eyes. But she let him go. That evening, Marcus stopped at a Walgreens on his way home. He needed to pick up Denise's prescription and some Tylenol for the headache that had been building behind his eyes all day. The headaches were becoming more frequent now. Another symptom of the stress he was carrying. He parked in the lot, went inside, got what he needed, and walked back to his car. That's when he saw it. A manila envelope was tucked under his windshield wiper. No name on it. No return address. Just a plain brown envelope, sitting there like it had been waiting for him. Marcus looked around the parking lot. It was nearly empty. A couple of teenagers were on the far side, leaning against a pickup truck and looking at their phones. An elderly woman was loading groceries into a minivan a few spaces over. Nobody seemed to be watching him. Nobody seemed to be paying any attention. He pulled the envelope from under the wiper, turned it over in his hands. It was thin. Could have been more than a single sheet of paper inside. He opened it. Inside was a photograph. It was old. The colors were faded, and the fashion told him it was probably from the early 1980s. The photo showed two young men standing in front of a house Marcus didn't recognize. They were both wearing Memphis State University t-shirts and had their arms around each other's shoulders. They were grinning at the camera like they didn't have a care in the world. Like the future was nothing but promise and possibility. Marcus recognized one of the men immediately. It was his father, James Washington Sr., looked young and strong in the photograph, maybe mid-20s. There was a light in his eyes that Marcus had rarely seen during his childhood, a joy, an openness, a freedom that seemed to have disappeared long before Marcus was old enough to remember. But the other man in the photograph, Marcus didn't recognize him at first, but something about the face seemed familiar. The eyes, the jawline, the way he stood with his shoulders squared and his chin lifted. Marcus stared at the photograph for a long time. The realization came slowly, like a shape emerging from fog. The other man in the photograph looked exactly like a younger version of Officer Dale Hendricks. Marcus drove straight to his mother's house. He didn't call first. Didn't give her any warning. Just got in his car and drove to Whitehaven, to the same modest 3-bedroom ranch house where he had grown up. Earline Washington was 81 years old. She still lived in that house by herself, even though Marcus and Denise had offered 100 times to move her somewhere closer. She still made sweet tea every morning and kept a pot of greens on the stove most Sundays. She still went to Greater Community Temple every week, sitting in the same pew where she had sat next to her husband for 47 years before he passed. She opened the door with a smile that faltered the moment she saw her son's face. "Marcus? Baby, what's wrong? Is it Denise? Is it the children? Lord, tell me everyone's okay." Marcus held up the photograph. "Mama, I need you to tell me the truth. Who is this man?" The color drained from Earline Washington's face. She grabbed the door frame to steady herself, and for a moment Marcus thought she might collapse. "Lord have mercy," she whispered. "Where did you get that?" "Mama, who is he?" Earline closed her eyes. When she opened them again, tears were streaming down her cheeks. Her lips trembled as she spoke. "That's Thomas Hendricks. He was your father's best friend. They grew up together on the same street in North Memphis. Did everything together from the time they were 7 years old. Thomas was at our wedding. He was supposed to be your godfather." The ground shifted beneath Marcus's feet. His father had never mentioned anyone named Thomas Hendricks. Not once in 52 years. What happened? What happened between them? His mother wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, took a deep, shaky breath. "Come inside, baby. This isn't a story for the doorway. This is a story you should have heard a long time ago, but your father couldn't bear to tell it. And after he passed, I thought maybe it was better to let the past stay buried." She stepped aside to let Marcus in. "But I guess the past doesn't stay buried. Not when it's still got bones that want to rise." They sat in the living room, the same room where Marcus had grown up watching television with his father on Saturday afternoons. Erline brought out a glass of sweet tea for each of them, then settled into her chair and began to speak. "What I'm about to tell you is going to change how you see your father, how you see our family. I need you to understand that what happened wasn't your daddy's fault. He was a victim. But the shame of it nearly killed him, and that's why he never spoke of it again." Marcus leaned forward. "Tell me, Mama." "There are 5 years of your father's life that he never talked about. 1978 to 1983. When you were little and used to ask questions, I would tell you those were hard years, and your father didn't like to remember them. I told you not to ask him about it. Some things are better left buried. Do you remember that?" Marcus nodded. He remembered. He had been curious as a child, but he had respected his mother's request, had never pushed his father on the subject. In 1980, your father and Thomas Hendricks were both working as janitors at Memphis State University. They had been friends since childhood. 2 black boys from North Memphis who survived poverty together, survived Jim Crow together, survived all the indignities that came with being black in the South during those years. They were like brothers, closer than brothers, even. She paused, took a sip of tea, set the glass down with hands that trembled. But Thomas had a secret. He had been stealing from the university. Not much at first, just supplies, equipment, things he could sell on the side to make a little extra money. Times were hard, and Thomas had a young wife and a baby on the way. He told himself it was just temporary, just until he got back on his feet. But it wasn't temporary, Marcus said. No, it wasn't. The thefts got bigger, bolder, more dangerous. And eventually, university security started investigating. They knew someone on the janitorial staff was responsible. They were getting close. Erline's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. Thomas panicked. And in his panic, he did something that destroyed 2 lives. He planted evidence in your father's locker. He told security that he had seen James taking things. He stood there and watched as his best friend, the man who had been like a brother to him for 20 years, was arrested, handcuffed, dragged away in front of all their co-workers. Marcus felt sick. Daddy went to jail. 7 months. 7 months in jail awaiting trial. 7 months away from me. 7 months of shame and humiliation while the whole neighborhood whispered about James Washington the thief. It nearly destroyed him, Marcus. It nearly destroyed us. But he got out. He was innocent. Yes, a young public defender named Robert Clayton took your father's case. You might know that name. He went on to become a Tennessee Supreme Court justice. But back then, he was just a young lawyer who believed in truth and justice. He investigated. He found holes in Thomas's story. Eventually, he uncovered what really happened. Thomas was arrested? Thomas was arrested. Your father was released and cleared of all charges. But something had changed in James. The man in that photograph, that joyful, trusting, open-hearted young man, he was gone. He never came back. Your father spent the rest of his life keeping his head down, not making waves, not trusting anyone outside his family. That's the man you knew. That's the man who raised you. Marcus looked at the photograph in his hands, at the 2 young men grinning at the camera, at the friendship that had been betrayed. What happened to Thomas? He was convicted, served 4 years in prison. When he got out, he was a broken man. He drank himself to death over the next few years. Died in 1992, alone, bitter, and full of regret. But he left behind a son, Marcus said. It wasn't a question. Erline nodded slowly. Dale, that's the name of the officer who's been harassing you, isn't it? I saw the name on one of those tickets Denise told me about. Marcus nodded. Dale Hendricks grew up believing his father was innocent. Thomas must have told him a different version of the story. Made James out to be the villain, the one who betrayed their friendship, the one who framed an innocent man. Erline's voice hardened. So now Dale Hendricks is taking revenge on my son for sins his father actually committed. He's punishing you for a lie that's been passed down like poison through his family. Marcus sat in his mother's living room for hours that night, long past midnight, processing everything he had learned, trying to reconcile this new knowledge with the man he had known as his father. James Washington Sr. had died in 2015, peacefully, in his sleep at the age of 78. He had been a quiet man, a simple man, a man who went to church every Sunday and never missed a day of work in his life. Marcus had loved him deeply, but now he understood why his father had been so insistent on teaching Marcus to keep his head down, to not make waves, to never give anyone an excuse to come after him. James Washington had learned the hardest lesson a black man in America can learn, that even your closest friend, your brother in all but blood, can destroy you if he chooses to. That trust is a luxury not everyone can afford. And now that lesson was echoing through the generations. Marcus looked at the photograph one more time before he left his mother's house that night, looked at the joy in his father's young face, looked at the man standing next to him, the man who would betray him, the man whose son was now carrying on that betrayal. Someone had left this photograph for Marcus to find. Someone wanted him to know the truth. But who? And why now? He thought about confronting Dale Hendricks directly, showing him the photograph, telling him what really happened all those years ago. But something told him to wait. The story wasn't over yet. There were still pieces missing, still truths waiting to be revealed. He just didn't know that the next revelation would come in a trauma bay, with Dale Hendricks bleeding out on a gurney, and Marcus holding the only hands in Memphis that could save his life. That moment was coming, and when it arrived, Marcus would face the hardest choice of his entire career. 3 weeks passed after Marcus learned the truth about Dale Hendricks. 21 more days of harassment. 21 more mornings of blue lights and cold eyes and manufactured excuses. But now Marcus understood what was behind them. Now he knew that Dale Hendricks wasn't just a racist cop with too much time on his hands. He was a son trying to avenge a father who didn't deserve avenging. That knowledge didn't make the harassment any easier to bear, but it did change something inside Marcus. A kind of clarity settled over him. He stopped taking the stops personally, or at least he tried to. He reminded himself that Dale Hendricks was operating from a lie, that the hatred in those blue eyes was built on a foundation of fiction. Still, Marcus didn't confront him, didn't try to explain. Something told him the moment wasn't right, that there were still pieces of the story waiting to fall into place. He couldn't have known how right he was. It was a Monday morning when everything changed. Marcus had just finished his preoperative rounds, checking on patient schedule for surgery that week. He was standing at the nurse's station, reviewing the day's schedule on his tablet, when his pager went off. 911, Trauma Bay, code blue. Marcus's heart rate spiked. A code blue in the trauma bay meant someone was dying. Someone needed a cardiothoracic surgeon immediately. He dropped the tablet and ran. The emergency department was controlled chaos when he burst through the doors. Medical staff swarmed around a gurney in the center of the room. Monitors beeped frantically. Someone was shouting for more blood. "What do we have?" Marcus called out, pulling on gloves as he pushed through the crowd. The ER attending, a young woman named Dr. Rivera, who Marcus had worked with many times, turned to him with relief flooding her face. Male, mid-40s, severe chest trauma, GSW to the upper chest. Bullets lodged near the ascending aorta. He's losing blood faster than we can replace it. We need a cardiothoracic surgeon now. Marcus reached the gurney. looked down at the patient. The world stopped, staring up at him, pale, terrified, with an oxygen mask strapped to his face and blood soaking to the bandages on his chest, was Officer Dale Hendricks. For what felt like an eternity, Marcus couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't think. This was the man who had tormented him for nearly 2 months. The man who had made him feel like a criminal in his own city. The man who had inherited a lie and turned it into a weapon. The man who had caused his hands to shake and his blood pressure to rise and his sleep to become a nightly battle. And now that man was dying, and Marcus was the only surgeon in the building who could save him. Dr. Rivera grabbed his arm. Dr. Washington, we're losing him. Are you going to operate or not? Marcus looked into Dale Hendricks' eyes. Past the fear, past the pain. He saw recognition there. Hendricks knew exactly who was standing over him. He knew exactly whose hands would decide whether he lived or died. The moment stretched out between them, surgeon and patient, victim and tormentor. 2 men connected by a betrayal that happened before either of them was born. Marcus made his decision. Get him 2 or 3, he said. Now. And someone paged Dr. Coleman. Tell her I need her to assist. They rushed Hendricks to the operating room. Marcus walked to the scrub sink outside, stripped off his jacket, and began washing his hands. The reflection that stared back at him from the mirror looked older than he remembered, more tired. But his hands, those hands that had been trembling for weeks, were perfectly still. Patricia Coleman appeared at his side. She had already heard who was on the table. Marcus. Her voice was careful, measured. I can find another surgeon if you want to step aside. Dr. Morrison is on call. He's competent. He can handle this. Marcus shook his head slowly. No, Marcus, no one would blame you. After what that man put you through. That's exactly why I have to do this. He turned to face his friend. His hands dripped water onto the floor. If I walk away now, Patricia, if I let him die because of what he did to me, then what was all of this for? What did I spend 30 years becoming a healer for? Patricia started to speak, but Marcus cut her off. My father spent 7 months in jail because a man he trusted chose revenge over truth. He chose to destroy rather than to heal. That choice ruined his life. It ruined Thomas Hendricks' life. And now it's ruining Dale's life. Marcus grabbed a sterile towel and began drying his hands. I'm not going to make that same choice. I'm going to save Dale Hendricks' life. And I'm going to do it because that's who I am. That's who my father raised me to be. Patricia was quiet for a long moment. Then she nodded. Okay, then let's go save his life. The surgery took 11 hours. 11 hours of painstaking, meticulous work. The bullet had done more damage than anyone initially realized. It had nicked the aorta, causing a slow bleed into Hendricks' chest cavity. Multiple blood vessels were damaged. There were complications upon complications, each one threatening to end the surgery, and the patient, before Marcus could finish. 3 times, Dale Hendricks flatlined on the operating table. 3 times, his heart stopped beating. 3 times, the monitors screamed their alarm, and the surgical team prepared for the worst. 3 times, Marcus brought him back. He worked with the focus of a man who had something to prove. Not to Hendricks, not to the hospital, not to anyone watching, but to himself, to the legacy his father had left him, to the principle that every life deserves a chance to continue, regardless of what that life has done. At 9:47 p.m., more than 11 hours after Hendricks had arrived in the trauma bay, Marcus finally stepped back from the table. He's stable, he announced. Get him to the ICU. I want continuous monitoring and hourly updates on his vitals. The surgical team began moving Hendricks out of the operating room. Marcus walked out into the hallway, stripped off his bloody surgical gown, and collapsed into a plastic chair against the wall. He was still sitting there an hour later when a young woman approached him. She was maybe early 20s, with braided hair and kind eyes that seemed older than her years. She stood in front of Marcus for a moment, like she wasn't sure whether to speak. Dr. Washington? Marcus looked up. Yes. My name is Angela Hendricks. Dale is my father. Marcus straightened in his chair. He hadn't expected this, hadn't prepared for it. They told me you saved his life, Angela continued. Her voice trembled slightly. After everything he did to you, all those traffic stops, all that harassment, they told me you knew it was him on the table, and you operated anyway. Marcus nodded slowly. I did. Angela sat down in the chair beside him. She was quiet for a long moment, staring at her hands folded in her lap. Then she reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope. I'm the one who left that photograph on your car, she said. Marcus stared at the young woman beside him, the daughter of the man who had tormented him, the one who had left the photograph that unlocked his father's past. Why? He asked. Angela took a deep breath. I've known the truth for years, Dr. Washington. The real truth, not the lie my father believes. She opened the envelope in her hands and pulled out a stack of old letters, yellowed with age and creased from being read over and over again. When I was 18, I found these in my grandmother's attic. She had written them to my grandfather while he was in prison, letter after letter, begging him to confess, begging him to tell the truth about what happened to James Washington, to stop living a lie and free his conscience. He never wrote back. Angela shook her head. Not once. He died holding on to that lie, and he passed it on to my father like an inheritance, a poison inheritance. She looked at Marcus with eyes that held years of pain. I grew up watching my father destroy himself with this hatred. He used to talk about your family like you were enemies in a war, like the Washingtons had stolen something precious from the Hendricks name and needed to pay for it. When he became a police officer, I think part of him was hoping he would get the chance to settle the score someday. Marcus thought about all those mornings on the road, all those traffic stops, all that carefully constructed humiliation. He got his chance, Marcus said quietly. Yes, and I watched it consume him. He lost his marriage over it. My mother couldn't take the bitterness anymore. He alienated his colleagues at work. He became obsessed with finding ways to hurt you. The man I knew as my father disappeared, and all that was left was this vessel for hatred. Angela wiped a tear from her cheek. I thought about telling him the truth so many times, showing him these letters, proving that his whole life was built on a lie. But I knew he wouldn't believe me. He had invested too much in the hatred. Admitting the truth would mean admitting that everything he believed was wrong, that his father, the man he had spent his whole life trying to avenge, was actually the villain. So why the photograph? Marcus asked. Why leave it for me? Because I knew this was coming. Not this specifically. She gestured toward the operating room, but something. I knew my father's obsession would eventually destroy him completely. I thought maybe if you knew the truth, you could find a way to break the cycle, confront him, show him evidence, something. She laughed bitterly. I never imagined it would happen like this. I never imagined you would end up saving his life. They sat in silence for a moment. The hospital hummed around them. The quiet beeps of monitors, the soft footsteps of nurses, the distant sound of a phone ringing at the reception desk. I'm sorry, Angela said finally, for everything my family has put yours through, for what my grandfather did, for what my father did. I'm so sorry. Marcus looked at this young woman, this daughter trapped between truth and loyalty, between love for her father and horror at his actions. She had been carrying this burden alone for years, and she had reached out to him, a stranger, hoping he might have the key to setting everyone free. It's not your fault, Marcus said, and it's not mine. The sins of our fathers don't belong to us. What matters is what we choose to do now. 3 days later, Dale Hendricks woke up. The first thing he saw when he opened his eyes was Marcus Washington standing at the foot of his hospital bed, reading his chart. For a long moment, neither man spoke. The monitors beeped steadily. Sunlight streamed through the window blinds, casting stripes of light across the white sheets. Why? Hendricks's voice was rough from the breathing tube, barely above a whisper. Why what? Why did you save me? Hendricks's eyes were wet. After everything I did to you, all those stops, all that hatred, why didn't you just let me go? Marcus set down the chart. He walked around the side of the bed and sat down in the chair beside it, the same chair Angela had sat in when she told him about the letters. Because I'm not you, Marcus said simply. And I'm not my father's enemy. I'm a doctor. I save lives. That's what I do. Hendricks turned his face away. His jaw tightened as he fought to control his emotions. I've wasted my whole life, he whispered. Hating you. Hating your family. My daddy told me. Your daddy lied to you. Marcus's voice was firm but not cruel. Not vengeful. Just honest. James Washington was innocent. Thomas Hendricks framed him to cover up his own crimes. Your grandfather spent 4 years in prison because he was guilty, and he spent the rest of his life lying to his family about it because he couldn't face the truth. Hendricks was crying now, tears streaming down his face and soaking into the pillow beneath his head. His shoulders shook with sobs that he couldn't control. I've spent 40 years hating an innocent man, hating his son, building my whole life around a lie. Marcus didn't say anything. There was nothing to say. He just sat there, letting Dale Hendricks grieve for the life he had wasted, for the father he had idolized, for the truth that had finally caught up with him. Some wounds take longer to heal than others. Some truths take years to accept. But the first step is always the hardest, the moment when you realize everything you believed was wrong. Dale Hendricks was taking that step now. And despite everything this man had done to him, Marcus found himself feeling something unexpected, compassion, because Dale Hendricks wasn't evil. He was wounded. He had been fed poison from the time he was a child, taught to hate people he had never met for sins they had never committed. He was a victim, too, a victim of his own father's lies. That didn't excuse what he had done. It didn't erase the 49 days of harassment, the humiliation, the trauma he had inflicted on Marcus and his family. But it did explain it. And explanation was the first step towards something that Marcus wasn't ready to give yet, but might be ready to give someday. Forgiveness. 6 weeks after Dale Hendricks was released from the hospital, Marcus received another letter. It was postmarked from Nashville and written in a handwriting he didn't recognize. The return address listed only a name, George Hendricks. Marcus opened it at his kitchen table while Denise made dinner. He began to read, and within the first paragraph, he felt the ground shift beneath him once again. Dear Dr. Washington, you don't know me, but I knew your father very well. My name is George Hendricks. Thomas Hendricks was my brother. I'm writing to you because I'm dying. Pancreatic cancer. The doctors say only a few months left, and I refuse to go to my grave without telling you the truth. The whole truth. You see, the story your mother told you was only half right. Thomas did frame your father. That much is true. But what nobody knew, what Thomas took to his grave and what I've kept secret for over 40 years, is why he did it. It wasn't just greed. It wasn't just panic. It was payment. In 1979, a man came to Thomas with an offer. This man was powerful, politically connected, with ties to law enforcement and local government. He wanted James Washington destroyed. He wanted James to lose everything, his job, his freedom, his reputation. Why? Because James had unknowingly witnessed something he shouldn't have. Something that could have ended this powerful man's career and sent him to prison. Thomas didn't want to do it. Despite what you might think, my brother loved your father like a brother. But this man threatened Thomas's family. He threatened to have Thomas killed, to have his wife hurt, to destroy everyone Thomas loved. So Thomas made an impossible choice. He betrayed his best friend to protect his family. The man who ordered this, his name was Richard Hendricks. No relation to our family, just a cruel coincidence of names. Richard Hendricks went on to become the chief of police in Memphis. He died in 2018, but his legacy continues. His son is now a captain in the Memphis Police Department. His grandson is a patrol officer. His name is Dale. Marcus read the letter 3 times before the full weight of it settled over him. Dale Hendricks hadn't just inherited hatred from his father. He had inherited it from the very system that created it. The same man who ordered the destruction of James Washington was Dale's grandfather. Dale had grown up in a family where the Hendricks name was synonymous with power, and where that power had been used to destroy black lives without consequence. Thomas Hendricks, the man Marcus's mother had blamed for everything, was himself a victim, forced to choose between his family and his friend. Pressured by a corrupt police official, who held all the cards. And Dale? Dale had been raised by both lies. The lie that Thomas was innocent, and the unspoken legacy of his grandfather's corruption. He had become a police officer, just like his grandfather and his father had been taught implicitly and explicitly that the badge meant power and power meant never having to answer for your sins. Until now, Marcus sat with a letter for a long time, thinking about cycles, thinking about how hatred and corruption could echo through generations, poisoning everyone they touched, thinking about his own father, who had suffered for something he never did, at the hands of men who faced no consequences. The question that haunted him now was simple. Did Dale know? Did he know that his grandfather was the one who had ordered the destruction of James Washington? Did he know that the hatred he had inherited wasn't just a family grudge? It was a deliberate campaign of persecution that had been sanctioned at the highest levels of local law enforcement? Marcus suspected the answer was no. Dale had been lied to his entire life. Why would this truth be any different? But the bigger question, the one that kept Marcus awake at night, was what to do with this information. Should he tell Dale? Should he go public? Should he contact Angela? In the end, he decided to wait, to watch, to see what would grow in the space where hatred had been cleared away. 6 months later, this is where things stood. Dale Hendricks had resigned from the Memphis Police Department. He was in therapy, working through decades of misplaced rage and the trauma of learning that his entire life had been built on lies. He and Marcus had spoken twice since his release from the hospital. The first conversation was short, just Dale saying thank you in the hospital lobby and Marcus nodding in return. The second conversation lasted 4 hours. They sat in a coffee shop on the outskirts of Memphis, two men connected by pain and history, trying to find a way forward. What they talked about, only they know, but sources close to both families say they discuss fathers and sons, lies passed down through generations, the weight of hatred, and the even heavier weight of forgiveness. Angela Hendricks had become an advocate for police accountability. She had written about her family's history, the lies, the corruption, the way generational trauma could poison entire family trees. Her articles have been shared thousands of times. She was helping other families break cycles of their own. Marcus Washington still operated at Methodist University Hospital. His hands were steady again. The trembling had stopped the day he walked out that 11-hour surgery. Every morning, when he drove down Poplar Avenue on his way to work, he passed a spot where the blue lights used to wait for him, the spot where Dale Hendricks had pulled him over again and again, trying to break him down. Now, when Marcus passed that spot, he said a quiet prayer, not for himself, for all the black men who didn't survive their encounters with hatred, for all the families, on both sides, still trapped in cycles they didn't create and don't know how to break. But the story doesn't end there. Last week, Marcus received another photograph. This one was recent. The date stamp showed it had been taken within the last few months. It showed a man Marcus didn't recognize, sitting in a car outside Marcus's house, watching. On the back of the photograph, in handwritten letters, were the words, "The Hendricks family doesn't forget. The Hendricks family doesn't forgive. And there are more of U.S. than you know." Marcus stared at those words for a long time, thought about Richard Hendricks, the corrupt police chief who had ordered his father's destruction and then risen to power on the backs of black suffering, thought about how Richard's son was now a captain in the Memphis Police Department, thought about how deep the roots of hatred can grow when they're watered by power and protected by silence. One cycle had been broken. Dale Hendricks was no longer an enemy. He was a broken man trying to rebuild his life on the truth instead of lies. But the system that created Dale, the system that had destroyed Marcus's father and protected Richard Hendricks and allowed corruption to flourish for generations, that system was still intact. And someone in that system was watching. So I ask you this as we close out today's story. When does it end? When do the sins of the fathers stop being visited upon the sons? And if someone out there is still watching Dr. Marcus Washington, still waiting for the chance to destroy everything he's built, what happens next? What I know for certain is this: Marcus Washington is still standing, still healing, still saving lives. He chose mercy when he could have chosen revenge, and that choice changed everything For Dale, for Angela, for their families. But the fight isn't over. It's never over. Because the systems that create hatred are bigger than any one man. And they don't stop just because one person finds the courage to break free. If y'all want to hear part 2 of this story, make sure you like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit that notification bell. Leave a comment below telling me what you think is coming next. Do you think Marcus should have saved him? And what would you have done on that operating table? Until next time, stay blessed, stay safe, and remember, every story has a truth buried somewhere beneath the lies.